Classical music is in the midst of a youth movement. A study from the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra indicated that people under the age of 35 are more likely to listen to classical music than their parents. But while accessibility has helped gain the genre more traction on platforms like Spotify or TikTok, is this surge in Mozart and Beethoven translating to the symphony halls? For more on this classical music renaissance, we are joined by CEO and music director of the Gulf Coast Symphony, Dr. Andrew Kurtz. Dr. Kurtz, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure to be here.
So this really interested me that more and more of the millennials and Gen Zers are now using social media to get more in tune and listening to classical music. And I was just curious if you are noticing this trend trickle down to like the Southwest Florida audience for people that are showing up at shows.
I think where the greatest impact is the Candlelight series, which we bring into the Music and Arts Community Center. We see a much more youthful audience there. We're not seeing the transition to younger audiences yet in our classical concerts, but of course when we do programming that's more culturally sensitive, like movie music, Star Wars, Harry Potter, then we do get a much more younger audience than our traditional pop shows when we're doing, say, our upcoming tribute to Tony Bennett. Those are going to appeal to an older audience.
So then you mentioned that going to the Music and Arts Community Theater there at the Unitarian Church, and so more young people tend to be going to that one as opposed to your shows at the Barbara B. Mann Hall Center. So do you think that it's just the idea of going to the symphony or a bigger theater maybe be a turnoff for youths, or is it just more of the familiarity of going to a smaller venue at this point?
That's an interesting question that probably we should think about more. I know that we really strive to create experiential type situations at the Music and Arts Community Center. When we opened the MAC, as we call it, we were specifically interested in diversity and diversifying what we were programming, diversify what we were doing. Because it was a smaller space and the costs were lower, we could experiment and take more risks as to what we were trying to do. And so we have found different types of programs will bring in different audiences from our community. One of the things we liked about the Candlelight performances was it was bringing in, 2 full houses. We seat 300 there as opposed to 1850 for the Barbara Mann for popular music, basically. But it was a string quartet that's playing. So they're still experiencing something that is of a classical nature. But they've also done classical concerts. The symphony itself, some of our programming has also brought in younger crowds. We have Tito Puente Jr. and Nestor Torres coming on Saturday night, for example, and we're seeing a different purchase pattern than we do for our Masterwork series, which are our classical concerts, or any of the Pops concerts that we've started to do. I think it really depends. I think most people now choose to go to programs based on what the show is. They're content sensitive. So if it's the program that they want to see or experience, they'll come to it. We created a whole series that we called Taking Flight, where we had a wine tasting and a food pairing to go along with it, and then a classical chamber music concert. And that did bring in a younger crowd. Again, I think people, when they go out, younger people especially, are looking for something that's more of an experience than just going to listen to a concert. As far as the TikTok trend and such, we're just beginning to see an increase in the people who follow us on those platforms. The Symphony is involved in all the major media platforms online, and we've shifted a great deal of our digital marketing and focus over the past 2 years. In fact, I would say 80% of our marketing is spent in the digital sphere. But ironically, the people who are seeing those ads and the people who are buying our tickets still tend to be the generation that we would call our retirees or our snowbirds. Not exclusively, but they're still the predominant amount of ticket buyers, which I don't necessarily think is different. I've been doing this professionally now for 40 years. I may not look that old, but I am. And when I first started in the business, people were saying, the audiences are dying, classical music is going to be dead. 40 years later, we're still saying the audiences are dying, classical music is going to be dead. And I don't think that's the case. I think the way people consume music is different. They didn't used to have the option of streaming anything they wanted on demand. In the old days, if you wanted to listen to Mahler, you had to go out and buy a recording or maybe wait for months until it was played on the radio station. And so now it's literally a search away, and not just one performance, but maybe 12 performances. So I think that consumption pattern has changed things. And what I found interesting when I read the study that you shared with me is that we're opening up a world of music that there was a generation because of the changes locally, and when I say locally, I'm talking the US, not Southwest Florida per se, where music education and the focus on those kinds of experiences were pulled out of the schools. So we sort of have a generation or almost two gap where the exposure and the experience of going to concerts and experiencing classical music has changed. So if we can find people who are interested in that through the different digital media platforms, then I think with the right experience, they'll want to hear it live, especially if they realize the live experience is so much more impactful and interesting. And it's unique because the one thing with the recording, it's always going to be the same. That's kind of what pop music is. When you have a Taylor Swift song, and you hear that song, you're kind of expecting it to always be heard that way. Whereas when you have Beethoven String Quartet, depending on the interpretation and things that may be even happening live as it's being performed, it will not be exactly the same. I mean, that's the beauty of, I think, live performance. And there are differences, obviously, even when a pop artist performs live. But we got cycled where we were expecting always the same, and when it was different, we got upset. And in classical music, it's always different. That's one of the reasons we go.
When you mentioned like some of like the Taylor Swift pop culture influence, there are kind of pop culture elements that you've been implementing into your programming as musical director, whether it's doing music of Disney or Star Wars. I know this fall is Harry Potter.
Music of Queen.
How important then are using those orchestral elements that people are familiar with in order to both give out to what people would expect to hear from sounds of John Williams or other well-known conductors, and then trying to bring it to a new light by using your symphony to, again, share it as a different sound that they may not have heard before?
I probably became a conductor and am here today because of the soundtracks of John Williams. So I played violin from the time I was 4 or 5. Like I remember playing the violin before I remember really learning how to speak. That's how early it was. But I really hadn't considered a career in it, even though I always played in orchestras. But when I was in my teens and I began listening to those amazing soundtracks, and I collected soundtracks, it just opened up this powerful range of music making that I had experienced some, but when you're playing in a school orchestra, it's not quite the same as these massive orchestras. And I had gone to live performances too. So I think the fact that these movie music scores, and John Williams was actually responsible for saving live music in movie scores, because the trend was going to digitally produced and much cheaper arranged, smaller type situations. And then when he started composing these massive scores for these huge blockbuster hits, it kind of resurrected the whole industry, which had started to die out in the early 70s. So I think there's nothing wrong with it, because there's nothing more powerful than a full symphony orchestra and the sounds and the emotional context that can be made by that essential instrument for a public. And so whether it's, a score for, Star Wars or Harry Potter or James Bond or Mission Impossible, the next time anyone goes to a movie, I challenge you to sort of disengage from the movie for a moment and see how the music itself is manipulating the tension. Because if the music was stripped out and all you had dialogue, it would be a much more pale, gray type of experience. I'm not saying that car chases wouldn't be exciting and things blowing up wouldn't be awesome, but it's actually that music in the background that's manipulating your emotional state and your sense of time and excitement, and is a very important part of the music making. And that translates back then to Mahler and Beethoven and Brahms, because those scores may not have a story going to it all the time, but it's playing on those same human experiences and impulses and instincts that we have, which is why I believe music is very much a universal language. Doesn't matter what culture you come from, doesn't matter what language you speak, but when you play a piece of music for someone, there's going to be a human response that is rather universal, and that's what's so powerful. And then when it comes actually to a culture, I think it's the arts are what we most remember about a culture. When we study these ancient cultures, and we're interested in what was their music, we're interested in what was their writing. You can't study the Greek society without reading the Greek plays. And so I think what's happening as young people begin to try and discover their place in the world and discover more about the world, and they're doing it through digital platforms, which I have nothing against. In fact, I read a different article in the Wall Street Journal that these digital platforms, including TikTok, has been a renaissance for people reading books again, because there's all these, I don't know what you call them, but hashtags about different books, and the generation of the 20s and 30s are sharing their opinions and what they like to read. And so Kindle and all those other digital platforms had seen this massive uptake over the past, it started right before the pandemic, almost this past 10 years, because people are sharing again. And so maybe it's not the way our parents' generation consumed music or consumed books or talked about it and through book clubs, but they're doing it online. And it's still creating that sense of community. And ultimately, that's what, at the Gulf Coast Symphony, we're most interested in. I mean, that's ultimately our mission. It's not about concerts. It's about creating community through music. Music is our tool. Music is the reason we bring people together. But what we're really trying to do is to be a part of the greater Southwest Florida community and have people, experience life and celebration and joy, and also tragedy at times, and just be together and find that common humanity.
Well, then you also talked about just there preserving the art and culture that kind of flows in together with it. And one of the things I was able to do last year was go to the tribute to Jerome Kern, who is a early 21st century composer, maybe not well known. You might know the songs, but not the man. So then when you're trying to highlight and bring new experiences to maybe people of all ages, how important is it to channel back to maybe those lesser known composers who could still have had an impact on the classical music and orchestra style, for years to come?
That's a really good question, and it makes me think that we're probably not doing as good enough job as we could in using our new platforms to educate and to bring people to the symphony. I think it's a transition for the arts community in general to figure out how we can bring what we do to a larger group of people. If you haven't grown up going to the symphony, as I did, then you're trying to figure out, I mean, we still get calls to our offices, what do I have to wear? Like, do I have to dress up? And there was, for us, we consider ourselves like a family organization. I mean, as long as you're dressed, I honestly don't care what you wear to one of our concerts. I think more people dress a little because they are going out. It's maybe a date or it's a family night. But if you want to come in shorts and a t-shirt to hear our concert, you're experiencing the music. It's not about you being seen, and I think there was a generation where that was much more important. But I think that's the hesitations which keep people listening to music in their homes rather than experiencing it in the concert hall. That, and then I think price, but I learned, for example, we do $15 student tickets for all of our concerts. What I learned this past 2 months as we've been doing some feedback sessions with different people is students don't know that the tickets exist. So anybody who's at FSW or FGCU or in even elementary, middle, high school can come to any of our concerts for $15. The change that we're going to implement this year is we're going to make those tickets available not as student rush, but in advance. And so we want money not to be the issue that keeps younger people who we understand are paying for school and probably working 2 jobs and studying to still be able to come and experience what we're doing. And part of that is us communicating better to them what the opportunities are and how they can experience what we are doing.
Perfect. All right. Well, Dr. Kurtz, thank you so much for joining us, and good luck on the upcoming season.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
Thanks for watching. We've got more great content for you, from news to the arts to the environment. So be sure to like and subscribe to WGCU's YouTube channel and follow us on our social media platforms for the stories that matter to you.